Oh hi, you're probably wondering why I'm so happy right now. Well, it's because I figured out how to do perfect drops every single time in Fortnite. So that means I'm landing sooner, that means I'm getting guns sooner, that means I'm getting early kills, and that means I'm getting the best possible start to games whenever I play. So, I don't know why she's decided to stop being happy. Be happy, lady, you're happy right now. Okay, we're happy. We're really happy. So, this is all to do with a number of different things. It's to do with angles, it's to do with terrain, it's to do with the way you drop, it's to do with how you hold your mouse, apexing, a number of different things. There's an algorithm in place that they've got that helps you do this, and I figured out how to beat it every single time. Be happy. So, all you have to do here is watch to the end. You'll see every single detail about exactly how you can get better drops in Fortnite. And honestly, it's probably going to be the best investment of 10-15 minutes of your life here if you do play a lot of Fortnite. If you find this useful, give it a thumbs up. And if you want to see more, subscribe. Otherwise, enjoy the vid. Okay, so the first thing we can talk about quite easily here is the bus line. The bus line's probably the single most important thing that determines exactly what else you're then going to do. You can see nice and early when you're in the lobby. We're in the preload lobby here. Exactly where the bus line's going to be. I would advise always trying to choose exactly where you want to drop in advance, at least the area that you want to, so you know whether you're going to be doing a hot drop or not. Knowing early that you're going to be doing a hot drop makes all the difference. I'm just going to drop to the authority as an example. So I would advise putting the marker down. That's such an easy thing to do. The bus line determines exactly what angle and when you're going to drop off. And just to prove the point, I'm going to do a drop here. And we can talk about some various other things in the video, such as terrain, the actual algorithm that's used to determine what the drop is and how successful a drop is, and other factors as well. So I'm aiming to drop on this ledge here through that door. And you can already see that this is a good drop. Very first drop, very first take, no issues. I'll be going through this door, I'll be landing first, I'll be getting... Ooh, that guy's got a slightly better drop than me. But I think he dropped a lot earlier to go somewhere else. Okay, now we can talk a little bit about the actual algorithm. Now, probably most people don't know this, but Fortnite used an algorithm to determine how good your drop is going to be. Nobody knows exactly what that algorithm is, as with many algorithms that are used around the world. But the algorithm characteristics are clearly going to be a number of things like the point at which you drop the bus departure, the angle at which you leave the bus, how steady you hold your mouse whilst you're dropping. Do you apex when you drop at the bottom or not? Do you hard drop? Do you hot drop or not? How quickly you press the drop button? Terrain is a big issue. The distance that you're flying to the landing spot, the stability, the flight drop angle and aerodynamics are also a big thing. So just taking some of the elements of the algorithm into consideration now and breaking them down a little bit. First I want to talk about the speed of bus departure. This is only really relevant if you are hot dropping. Hot dropping being obviously dropping immediately to drop in one of the very near side points of interest, POIs. Doing a hot drop's quite obviously easy to do. You just have to watch the timer on the bus. And that's, you've just got to be ready, waiting to as quickly as possible. So if I'm dropping at Misty Meadows, I've got to be watching the timer in the top right hand corner, ready to just immediately drop. That actually wasn't the best, but... So I'm just gonna stop around here for a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about terrain and dropping on terrain. So most people probably already know this and have known it for a long time now, but for those that don't know, a really big deal in Fortnite is the actual terrain that you're dropping into. If you're dropping onto a mountain, the highest point that you drop to, if you look on the right hand side, you can see my parachute here. You'll see as I fly over the mountain, so the zone I've got to drop onto goes up as I fly over the mountain. As I move back further away from the mountain, I've got a longer distance to drop into. Obviously the best terrain to drop into is water level, and obviously the level of water is determined by various factors. In this example, you see there's a dam there. The level of water there is lower than the level of water there. If I drop there, I'm going to be able to get a lower drop than if I drop there. Obviously, there's all kinds of different terrain that you can look at. Buildings are probably one of the main ones, but even trees can make the difference. If you drop over a tree, your drop will be a higher drop. and you'll be put at a disadvantage if you're trying to get a low, quick drop. You just have to be mindful of where you're dropping. And how do you actually determine that? Well, when you're looking on the map, all of the terrain's quite visible. I wouldn't recommend zooming in necessarily, but try to look for pockets of water, and you don't have to necessarily mark the terrain that you're going to land on. But what you may want to do instead, I've just landed on the water here, what you may want to do instead is mark where you want to land, and then make sure that you're dropping on water that's within a reasonable circumference around that. This guy doesn't want to let me do the video. So it's first really important to place the marker down on the point of interest that you're going to land on, and then immediately start looking at where am I actually going to finish my drop point. Where is the lowest point I want to be when my parachute deploys or glider deploys. Okay, so the single most important factor when you're doing the hot drops, as I discussed earlier, is literally the speed at which you press the space bar if you're on mouse and keyboard to exit the bus. How quickly can you press that button in comparison to how quickly the bus will let you press that button? And that is the single biggest factor. When you're doing hot drops, you still need to take into account terrain. You still need to take into account angles, distance from the POI that you're going to, other things like that, apexing at the bottom, lots of other things that you still need to take account of. But when you are hot dropping, the most important thing for sure is the reaction time and how quickly you can drop. Because if you're doing a hot drop, basically everyone's trying to do the same thing. Get out of the bus as quickly as possible and get to the ground and get onto a gun so that they can start killing people. If you'd like, you're able to use these humanbenchmark.com/test/reaction time. There are other benchmarks out there. This is just the reaction time one. All this does is measure from red to green how quickly you react with a mouse click. But your mouse click reactions are going to be similar to what your reactions will be to press, or the same, the spacebar on your keyboard to exit the bus as well. Obviously, same applies for PlayStation and Xbox and stuff like that too. So I'm just going to give this a quick go. I think previously when I've tried this, I've got 16 milliseconds is my absolute quickest. I've had frequently between sort of 17 and 20 milliseconds, which is okay. I'm 34 years old, so that's pretty good for a 34-year-old. Professional gamers are getting between 14 and 16 milliseconds, but obviously they're also incredibly good at aiming and stuff like that when we're talking about the professional FPS players. Okay, so I'm going to just give the reaction times a quick go now for science. 18 milliseconds. This takes an average of your 5 attempts, so that's what my average is at the moment. Woo! You can also do it too soon. Okay. Man, 19 milliseconds. I'm basically a professional gamer right now. A professional gamer. Let me know in the comments what you're able to get. Proof or it never happened. Okay, pics or it never happened. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about the drop angle that you take and the aerodynamics from the bus line. These are probably one of the very most important factors in exactly how successful your bus drop will be. So if you drop completely vertically and if you drop slightly off vertically, there's going to be virtually no difference whatsoever in the speed of your drop, because the aerodynamics are not different enough to make a big enough difference. But as the angle starts to go more flat like this, more towards like a 90-degree angle, or let's say a 45-degree angle, it starts to affect your speed to touching the floor. I'm going to just put this into perspective in the authority, and also you need to be ready to drop at the right angle from the bus as well. You can't just get your angle adjusted once you've dropped. Your angle needs to be correct before you drop. So pulling your mouse right back here and just tilting it forward ever so slightly and dropping. So what I'm doing here is just aiming for just in front of this bridge on the water. So I know my terrain is going to be good, and I can check on the mini-map to check that. And I'm going to apex at the bottom by pulling my mouse forward like this. So that apex at the bottom doesn't make a huge difference on the algorithm, but it makes a difference. And you can see again here, I've got the best drop by a mile to, let's say, this gun. No one's brave enough to land in the door. That kill was a direct result of getting a better drop than them, for sure. And that was just a direct result of her being really crap with a shotgun. Okay, so we talked a little bit about angles. We talked a little bit about aerodynamics. Now I want to talk just very briefly about quite an important factor, which is the actual precise angle that you drop from on the bus. So the actual angle your body takes, which then dictates what the overall aerodynamics will be when you first drop from the bus, determines whether or not you're going to be getting drag and therefore slowing down for the first part of your drop. And obviously that's the most important part, because that's where you're first going to be accelerating into the aerodynamics. And remember what we said earlier about dropping vertically and dropping slightly off vertically. There's basically no difference in that. So we're going to dictate the aerodynamics. Now if I pull my mouse right back, that is a vertical drop right now. And a lot of people make the mistake, let's just mark a POI for the sake of demonstration. A lot of people make the mistake of looking at the POI and then pressing spacebar. Looking at the POI is not going to help you. Looking at your angle that you're dropping on is what you want to be doing. So let's just go to the Fortilla as an example. I'm not going to look at the Fortilla. I'm going to be looking at my angle, pulling right back to get a vertical drop, and then pulling forward just a little bit, and then dropping. And you can see that's the smoothest drop you can get in terms of getting straight into a decent aerodynamic. I'm going to apex at the bottom and land over water. And I've got quite a low drop here for the apex. One of the kind of remaining most important things to talk about when you're dropping from the bus. We've talked a lot about many other factors and the things that are included within the algorithm that helps determine how successful your drop is. Probably the single most important factor is the point at which you actually deploy your glider. And I'll talk about the distances and the angles for that at a later stage in the video. But essentially, when you pick an area that you want to land at, even if you're not sure exactly where in that area you want to land, it's important that you try and get an area around the circumference of that landing spot where you deploy. Now obviously terrain can make a difference on where exactly you're going to deploy. What you want to be doing is making sure that you're ideally landing over water, because that is the lowest point. And you ideally don't want to be deploying your glider yourself. You want the computer to be deploying it because you've hit the lowest point, as in you're forced to deploy it. Let's just go Steamy Stacks here. Now Steamy Stacks, we're lucky because there's quite a lot of terrain here that we can work with that allows us to drop over water and a distance that allows us to deploy the glider at the very bottom of the allowable drop. So you always want to be working on the basis of dropping in line with your maximum drop point. If you're having to deploy your glider early, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to get the best drop. So here, I'm not going to deploy. I'm going to be over water. I'm going to apex at the bottom. The terrain's good. And this allows me to get a really, really low drop in Steamy Stacks. Let's see if anyone else is coming. Well, I mean, those guys are just, I don't even know what they're doing. Don't look like they're coming here. In fact, it's difficult to tell because no one's coming to Steamy Stacks. But I know that I know it's a good drop. It's a very good drop. Basically, I'm landing straight here and able to get a gun straight away. So straight away, I mean, a bit lucky with the loot to get blue loot, but I'm in a pretty good place here to start attacking people. Okay, so let's now talk a little bit about the bus itself. The bus itself is a lot bigger on the map than what it is in real life. It's about the size of one tile. It's slightly longer than one tile. And I did recently record a video where actually a few days ago, I recorded a video for this video actually, measuring the distance of the map. Long story short, on that video, the map is around about 1.9 kilometers in length. Normally get about 35 seconds of travel for the bus. In this case, we've got a seat. We'll see when it goes green in the top right hand corner. 33 seconds. The bus itself travels, so let's say 1,900 meters divided by 33 seconds. The bus itself probably travels at around about 55 to 60 kilometers per hour. But the main thing to note here on the bus is that you actually drop from the middle of the bus, not the front or the back side of it. So you need to bear that in mind when you're picking your spot and when you're picking the angle for the POI to drop, and of course the area that you're going to drop to in order to enable you to get to your POI. So here's the part where we start to get a little bit more scientific about the bus drops. So I've taken some time to take the attributes through a screenshot and some Photoshop work to get the bus and the map and the line of the bus so that we can play around with some examples, and then at the end of the video I'll then do more examples of me dropping and getting perfect bus drops every single time. So this is my trusty PowerPoint section. The map size. So why is the map size important, and how does this affect the algorithm and your dropping decisions? Well, that should become clear. The map is 8 by 8 tiles. Each tile is 65 build pieces long, and each build piece is about 365 centimeters tall. I will link a video that I've done about this that proves this, because it's quite important. So 365 centimeters tall for a build piece times the 65 means one of these coordinate squares is 237 meters, 0.25 meters in length. And obviously there are 8 tiles, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tiles. So we have to times 8 by the length of one tile to get the full length. We've got 1.89 kilometers in length end to end. This doesn't take account of land mass or sea. It's purely just the edge of the coordinate here to the edge of the coordinate in either direction. The bus usually travels the length of the map in around about 31 to 35 seconds. So we average that at about 33 seconds, sometimes a bit more, sometimes it's less, depending on the angle that the bus is travelling. If it's going more vertical or more horizontal, the time will be shorter because there's a lower distance that they've got to travel. Whereas if it's going diagonal, there's obviously a longer distance that the bus has got to travel. The bus speed is therefore 1,898 metres divided by the average of 33 seconds. We'll use a rough average. So we've got roughly 57.5 metres per second. And when you convert that, so yeah, most likely it's a little bit quicker than this actually, yeah, because we've measured this 1,898 meters as being exactly vertical or exactly horizontal, when in reality it's normally got a bit of a stagger on it, or it's diagonal. So let's say 60 meters per second as the absolute minimum speed that the bus goes. So that's when you convert meters per second into kilometers or miles per hour, you get 216 kilometers per hour or 134 miles per hour. So therefore, in summary for this, you've basically got between 31 and 35 seconds traveling at 216 kilometers per hour to make all of the small decisions about the things that affect the algorithm. And obviously it's practice makes perfect. And the next sections of the video will help hopefully put into perspective some of those key elements that I've discussed, and again the examples at the end. Let's go back into the actual slideshow here. All I've done is I've taken the element of a bus from a screenshot, and I've taken the element of the line here, the bus line. Now I can also I can rotate these things as well using these rotations, so we can change some of the scenarios. For instance, if it's going that way and we want the bus, let's say here, I should probably bring the bus to the front actually. and we want the bus going on that direction. We can now run through some exact examples and the angles for this. There are 3 main measurements, and this is probably, I would say this is actually the most important part now of the video that we're getting to, because the angles that you jump out at in comparison to the 90 degree, in comparison to the point of interest where you're looking to drop to, in comparison to the point that you deploy. The way those 4 things interact are the defining point of whether or not you'll have a successful drop. So there are some key things that you need to think about here. I'll use the example of dropping at steamy stacks. I've just moved the bus around here, but the main things you need to take into consideration now when we're talking about how those things interact with each other. Well, first of all, you've got the angle of the bus line, and that'll be whatever it is. Then you've got a 90 degree angle from that line, right? Now, it doesn't matter where that 90 degree angle is, but a 90 degree angle, So this angle here is 90 degrees, that angle there is 90 degrees. That's important to think about your drops in terms of angles here. So if we're going to steamy stacks, there's a 90 degree-ish angle there. Now, if the bus is there, we don't want... Now, let's just start talking about where we actually want to be dropping. If we drop here, so the third element is where the middle of the bus is in relation to the point of interest and that 90 degree angle. Clearly, if you drop here, if the bus is there, we'll just move the bus there for sake of example. If you're here and you drop there, the distance that you're flying, this is essentially the flying distance, really. So the way that angle interacts with there, that's a pretty long distance that you've got to go. So dropping early, the benefit of dropping early in this example here is completely wasted by the drawback of the fact that you've got to drop such a long distance before you get there, especially when we consider that the bus itself is traveling at 216 kilometers per hour, right? So it doesn't make sense, and I'm only using this as quite an extreme example, it doesn't make sense to drop that early, because the benefits of dropping early and getting out of the bus and starting to fly earlier than everyone else are completely overshadowed, really, by the fact that you've got to go such a long distance. Now, obviously, if you're dropping over here to get to steamy stacks, you're actually dropping much later than everyone else that's probably going to be dropping around here, in which case, and the distance that you've got to travel, let's just use this, the distance that you've got to travel is a lot shorter than that. So you've got a lot less distance to travel, but you've wasted another 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6 seconds before you're even dropping, which means you're not starting to move towards the floor to get to steamy stacks. Now, in this particular drop here, in line with what I've talked about earlier about terrain, it's this sort of section that you're probably going to be roughly aiming for in relation to steamy stacks, because it's water, it's flat, and it's within a relative zone. And I'll talk about the relative zones for deployment a little bit later. But if you deploy if you jump out of the plane here, you're wasting another 3 or 4 seconds before you're even flying down. And actually, if you think about it, if you put it there, the distance is exactly the same there as it is there, in which case it makes a lot more sense to drop here. There's only an example, but dropping there makes a difference. But now, this is where I think a lot of people make a mistake. They either drop too far back here, in which case this distance starts to increase considerably. Here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 dashes. I don't know what that is in measurements. It's probably about 2 coordinate tiles in length, so it's probably about 500 meters, that maybe a little bit less than 500 meters in length. But dropping here, and also you can't drop straight down here. You can't just drop a little bit down here. You've actually got to drop towards the water to get the best benefit of the terrain. So you've got to think about those factors. So in this particular example, and in most examples, it's normally best to drop just before you hit the right angle, because here we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 dashes. We've got 4 fewer dashes in this example versus the right angle, that's the shortest distance there at the 90 degree angle. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's only 2 dashes shorter, so probably something like 10-15% a shorter distance to drop at that right angle, but you're getting the extra benefit of 1 or 2 extra seconds here in terms of the flight path. So dropping out just before you hit that angle, the right angle, is normally advisable. Bear in mind, we're not looking for when the front of the bus hits this section, we're looking for when the middle of the bus hits this section. If you're thinking in terms of that being the right angle, maybe when the nose gets to just before it hits it, the middle will be just a little bit lagging behind, and that's a good time to jump. Now, doing that also means we're not having to travel that distance that we talked about earlier to get to the water terrain. Here, we're getting to the water terrain in next to nothing. So our drop can be really, like almost vertical, or a little bit better than vertical. So in virtually every single example, that sort of scenario is going to be the best scenario to do, to look at where the right angle is in comparison to where your point of interest is on the flight path, and drop just before. You're getting an earlier drop because you're not waiting until the optimum distance in terms of that's the optimal distance to right angle. You're not waiting until that. You're getting the benefit of the extra time, but you're not dropping so early that the distance you're actually traveling becomes difficult. And bear in mind, the aerodynamics will be a lot worse if you're traveling like that than if you're traveling like that, in terms of hitting the floor or deploying as late as possible. So I'm just going to run through another couple of examples like this, just to give some examples. I'll do one for the authority. One that I did earlier was a bus drop. You'll notice earlier on in the video, I dropped here into the authority. No, I dropped here into the authority. It was a really, really good drop, just as an example. So I used the terrain here. I didn't want to drop above the bridge, which would have been 1 or 2 tiles of extra height. So it would have deployed me a little bit earlier. I didn't want to drop above the land, the same issue. It would have deployed me a little bit earlier. I wanted to deploy as low as possible while still being able to hit the point of interest, smoothly, essentially. So let's just go with the example. I can't remember what direction the bus was going in, but we'll just, for the sake of example, we'll say the bus was going this way. I'll just move this around a little bit. So if the bus is going in this direction here, and I'm aiming to go to the authority, that's actually a bad example because a better drop there will be here. Better drop there will be here. I can't remember the flight path that game where I dropped there actually took, but it made most sense to drop there. In this example, it makes most sense. We'll use this example, continue with this example. So if we're dropping here, it's not great to drop this early. The right angle for the authority is going to be there. About there, in comparison to the bus line. And we'll draw the bus line as well. So this is going to be about there to there. That's the bus line relativity. So that's about a right angle here. That's where we know once we're dropping past that, it's a bad drop. If we're dropping on that, it's probably not going to be a great drop because people have already dropped before us. But if you're dropping too far this way, you've got all this terrain to contend with, and also the water that's a little bit higher here. We want to be aiming for this water here because we know that's the lowest water. It's lower than the waterfall water. Now, if I then move this bus along its journey, so let's just use that as an example. The distance here between the middle of the bus and the right-angled POI becomes quite considerable, whereas the distance here in that example is better. The problem is, terrain-wise, we're still going to have to... If you just drop straight down here, you're basically dropping onto a mountain. You're 10, 20 tiles up. Build tiles, that is, up. In which case, you're going to be deploying so early because you've not got the space to deploy into. Remember, you don't want to hit the ground and die. So you need to deploy early enough. And that's why the game forces you to deploy. So that isn't a good drop. Normally, that would be a good drop if the terrain is flat underneath. But the terrain isn't flat here, so we've got to think about where else we can drop. Dropping into this pool here seems like a good plan because it's flat water and it's lower than the waterfall. So there you look at, well, where's the right time to do it. Well, dropping there would be okay because you've then got this distance to go to, but the distance from there to there is still quite considerable. So here I'd probably look at something like there, and then the distance there to there is a little bit less. Now you'll notice that the linear route to go towards the POI is not necessarily the right route to go. Sometimes it makes more sense to go slightly off the linear route and then change your direction when you hit the low point. So what I'm actually going to do here in this drop, even though that will be the point-to-point version, I'm actually going to drop into there as quickly as possible because that's the shortest distance. And that means that the angle will be almost horizontal, just slightly off horizontal, which means the aerodynamic speed will be a lot higher. I will be dropping quicker. And then what I'm going to do is just copy paste that. I'm going to then change my direction to go to the authority like that. But even though that doesn't quite look like a really good drop, here we're dropping in really perfect terrain for that example. So that's just another example that I've run through, and I'll do this in game as well with some examples again. We'll use one more example of, let's just say Pleasant Park. That's a really, really common drop for many people. We'll just move these out of the way for now. So let's say the bus is coming, I don't know, this way, for example. Okay. So the point-to-point, first it's easy to draw the bus line. It's easy enough because obviously there's the blue indicator. So we'll draw the bus line. We then want the right angle to our point of interest. So we say point of interest is there exactly, or let's say you're landing at this house here, which is a really good Good drop point. The right angle is actually there, but the thing is we've got a lot of water in this area here. So we don't need to be worrying about leaving it so late to get that extra optimal distance, because we'll be dropping down and hitting the floor level sooner here because we've not got the terrain that's in the way. Here we had a lot of terrain in the way when we were dropping at the Authority over the mountains. Here we don't have the issue with the terrain. So let's just run through some examples. If I'm dropping too early here, I get the benefit. I do get the benefit of the early drop, which is great. But the thing is, the bus is almost travelling directly towards Pleasant Park. It's slightly off. It's travelling that way. I mean, it'd be different if it was travelling this way. But because it's travelling almost in its direction, the bus's speed is going to be of benefit to you. So, and that by doing that a little bit sooner, let's say dropping here, get the bus, middle of the bus. If you drop there, you're more than likely, well, first of all, you're cutting off the distance and you've got the extra speed of the bus to take you closer to Pleasant Park. You're not dropping late here. You're not dropping on the right angle. The right angle is the shortest distance, obviously, from an angle's point of view. Now, the thing is, again, you don't necessarily need to drop in a linear fashion here. Probably here, the best option would be to drop to maybe something like there. Now, why are we doing this? The reason why we're doing this is, first of all, it's almost straight. It's nearly direct point to where you're going to land. But this just allows you to drop. So let's say here. This just allows you to drop in a more horizontal fashion. I would never advise dropping just horizontal unless it's a hot drop. I would always advise dropping slightly off the horizontal drop, because you're also getting closer to the point of interest and there's no loss of speed in that drop there. So it's always worth using that extra bit of space if you've got it to use. Now, of course, sometimes you need to go further away if there's loads. Let's say if there was loads of terrain here, sometimes you have to go further away, but in this case we don't have that terrain. So the best thing would be to probably go to there or thereabouts, or you could maybe drop here. Something like that, something along the lines of this kind of area here, because that distance there, when you're dropping so far from the map, that extra distance that you travel doesn't actually make a big difference when you're flying at a very high speed, almost vertically. It's only when you're dropping at a very sort of flatter angle that makes a big difference on the speed of your drop, the velocity and the acceleration of your drop. Again, we're talking about human dynamics here, and the bus is based on real drops, real parachute drop. So hopefully that gives you some idea of that. The final thing on angles, really, in terms of a side view. So all I've done here is take a side view of the battle bus. You've got the ground level here, which let's just assume it's flat most of the time because you're going to be dropping on water. Just leave it like that for now. We'll save the complications because we've been through terrain. Now, the distance, just to illustrate the point that I've mentioned a few times now, the distance between the battle bus and the ground, the relative distance, if you drop like this, the aerodynamic speed loss you get from that amount is too significant. Not only is the aerodynamic speed different, but also you're traveling a higher distance too. So you're losing twice when you drop too early or drop too late, because first of all you're dropping more slowly through the sky, there's more drag and the aerodynamics are not as good and the algorithm will pick that up, drop algorithm. But secondly, you're actually going a further distance as well if you drop too early or too soon. So you almost always, there's not many occasions, unless you're going to do a challenge and you're dropping halfway across the map or 2/3 across the map, which is completely different because no one else is going to be dropping there anyway. Or extremely rare. Almost always you're going to want to drop at a very steep angle. The vertical drop will get you the absolute best speed, and also it is the shortest distance. We know it's the shortest distance because it's a 90° to where you're going to. Obviously there could be some terrain to think about here, so that's something that you can take into account of separately. But the distance here between dropping at an angle like that and dropping it at an angle like that is... The actual distance that you drop is barely anything different, and the speed and the aerodynamics will be extremely similar at that level because there's virtually no difference between those angles here. It's almost, this line here is almost a vertical line. The speed of the drop will be almost identical to this one. And we know, we can see that the distance there is almost exactly the same as well. It's basically half of one dash longer. Some people that are more mathematically minded than me might want to work this out in a bit more detail. I'm not bothered with that, but let's just turn this. So the benefit of dropping like that, though, however, is that if you turn the angles around, you're hitting the same POI, you're hitting the same spot, but you've been able to drop maybe 1 or 2 or 3 seconds earlier to get the same level. So this is why it's quite important to think about the angles that you're dropping at in relation to right angles. So we're going to drop just before a right angle here, and we showed an example earlier of dropping just before the right angle on the bird's eye view as well. Hopefully that makes good sense to people. You're getting a short distance still, nearly the shortest possible distance here. There's not much difference between that drop and that drop. And you're also getting one of the bestest speeds you can there in terms of aerodynamics. Okay, if you drop from here, the middle of the bus there, you're going a further distance, and you're also going to have drag in your aerodynamics as well. So that's going to stop you from having a good drop. Hopefully that makes good sense to people. I'm now going to try some examples in-game just to prove the point that all these factors combined do make a huge difference and can enable you to get the perfect drop every single time. Okay, so I'm now going to do a roll through, a very quick multiple edits of me having amazing drops. But things to bear in mind here, I'm using all the principles I've talked about. If you've made it this far and you've seen all those principles and the things I've talked about, the algorithm and all that, the angles, if you've made it this far, you'll now see all the examples of me making amazing drops. And it really, really does work, genuinely works. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to do 5 drops. I'm not going to edit out any of the drops. Even if one's slightly bad, you're going to see all 5 drops in a row very quickly. But I will edit them so that they're smaller in time and you see them one after another. Right, so here, I'm going to drop to... Let me see. I'm going to drop to... Let's try Sweaty Sands on top of the house. Now, because Sweaty Sands is... The big building's about 9 or 10 tall, I can actually afford the drop to be a little bit quicker. So I'm going to aim for this. And I'm going to drop towards the big house. Now, there are little quirks like that. If the terrain that you're dropping on is a lot higher, you can obviously drop closer to it when you deploy, as an example. So that's where I'm aiming for. And then I'm going to go for the building. Apex at the bottom. It's looking pretty good. See if we got anyone with us. Ah, man, there's no one with us. Well, you know it's a perfect drop by virtue of the fact that I land perfectly on the top of the building. So whilst I'm doing these examples, this is example number 2. I'm going to try and drop at a variety of different drop zones with terrain and stuff like that. The bus line's going from northwest to southeast right now. I'm going to do a fairly quick drop and land one of my favourite spots to land at Pleasant Park on the gun. This is a good spot to test because there is a gun there normally on top of this house. And if your drop is good, you land on that gun and everyone else is a little bit screwed. So I'm going to land just in front of the whirlpool. I'm measuring the angle down, dropping slightly early. The game sometimes puts you out flat as it did then, annoyingly. That's a bug in the game. I'm keeping the mouse as still as possible. Pull it forward a little bit, an apex at the bottom. And this should be now a perfect drop. Now, you almost like take your hand off the mouse at this point and let it take its course. That was actually a fail, but I landed on the roof and I landed before anyone else. So I'm still going to end up with a gun before anyone else. So here I'm going to go for one of my other favourite drop zones, which is here on Lazy Lake. This involves dropping into the body of water here. And as it's going straight over Lazy Lake, I should be able to get there pretty easy. So pull my mouse back. There's another delay there. That's just the Fortnite error. Game error. It's so annoying that happens. Holding my mouse as still as possible. Apex at the bottom. Now, I know that I'm going to land on a chest that's perfectly there. And you can see easily here, I've got the best drop from anyone. Easily. Easily, easily, easily. Now, if I didn't look at them, I would have landed perfectly on the... Oh, no. That guy. And even though, for some stupid reason, I have ping of 150 right now. Easy get. 2 quick, easy kills there. 3 easy kills. I don't know why the game's giving me 150 ping right now. That's very weird. But the points still stands. Getting a really good hot drop. 3 really easy kills just from basically getting a drop that was better than everyone else's.